Okay, so hi everybody. Obviously, this is not how we were all intending to present our lectures, but I'm excited to talk to everyone today about urban animals. Basically, just how animals have been able to hack life in the city and the resulting impacts on urban areas. So, I worked on this lecture with myself, I'm Caitlin, Jesse, Sarah, and Jared. So, you'll be seeing their videos hopefully right after mine, but if not, shortly after. So, first, let's review just a couple things before we really jump into the meat of our discussion. So let's talk a little bit about urban avoiders. I know we went over this in class, but essentially an urban avoider is a plant or a microbe or an animal, which is what we're going to be talking about, that cannot or will not persist in city environments. The next thing that I want to talk about is urban exploiters, which is essentially the opposite. Again, I know we talked about this in class, just probably good to review since we're all kind of in a crazy headspace right now. So these are animals or plants or microbes or fungi or whatever you want to talk about who thrive in the city. So they can often push out native species as a result of this. There's a lot of examples. Pigeons might be a good one, kind of pushing out more like migratory birds or more avoidance birds or birds who are really dependent on a specific food source, since pigeons will eat just about anything. Just anthropogenic, which is just human cost or impact, and reconciliation ecology, which I think Jesse is going to talk to you guys a little bit more about. But that's basically just the study of using ecology to encourage biodiversity in human-dominated ecosystems. Cities, obviously, are a great example of that. And an example of reconciliation ecology is bird feeders. So it doesn't really have to be scientific. It can just kind of be just an idea. And this topic needs a lot more research, but hopefully that'll be coming soon. Who knows? All right, moving on. So, I'm kind of in the way. I'm going to move my screen. Just in broad stroke terms, what would we consider to be an urban exploiter? So usually we consider them to be generalists. So what that means is that they're able to thrive on a wide variety of resources. So they can use a number of different foods. They can have loose or no territory size constraints. So something that needs like a certain amount of space might not be able to function super well in the city versus an animal that's non-territorial or an animal that has a very small or easily kind of malleable territory size. Flexible urnalism, I don't know the correct word for this, but what I mean is basically like mountain lions, for example, which you can see a picture of there, right in front of the Hollywood sign, which is kind of cool. Mountain lions are generally more crepuscular, but they can make shifts based on when humans are not most active or are most active, but that's not really the case here. So they actually can kind of shift their hunting times and hunting abilities. A lot of big cats are like theorized to be able to do this, which is really interesting, but other species can do it too. Flexible phenology, that's a little bit more planty, but it also can affect migratory species, so it's still important to mention. There's lots more, but again, we can kind of move on from this. I think we all have gone over this in class. Oh, apparently I need to, there we go. So here's our next topic. So urban exploiters are not the only animals that are moving into our cities, though they may make up the majority or even the vast majority. They are not the only ones. So as green spaces and green practices increase in popularity in these urban areas, like New Orleans is a great example, as we see more things like Lafitte Greenway and big kind of park developments like Audubon Park, City Park, we're seeing more animals that we traditionally consider to be wild or averse to human contact moving into our cities. So down here we have a picture of monkeys. I know that's somewhere in India. I just can't remember exactly where. Like I said, this is a mountain lion in the hills of Los Angeles. This picture is from an excellent article called How Animals Are Hacking Life in the City, which I'm going to talk more about right now. Oh my gosh, I can't stop. Oh my gosh, I keep skipping ahead. Okay, so what adaptations allow animals to hack urban areas? So there's a number that are really important for living life in the city. One of possibly the most important ones is being able to tolerate pretty much 24/7 light and noise. So that's something that a lot of animals are highly averse to, or that can cause like massive animal death, especially in insects. So that's a very important one. They have to be able to tolerate human contact and human interference. So they really need to be malleable to change. So things are changing on a daily basis, like as construction goes up, as humans are moving, as weather is changing. They need to be probably more flexible, less sensitive to human activity than some other more human averse species that won't persist in urban environments. They have to be able to avoid being struck by vehicles somehow. So that's a branch of reconciliation ecology, but the animals need to be taking care of that on their own as well in order to survive and thrive in the city. So being able to recognize like where they can and can't go, essentially. Not having demanding environmental specifications. So if you're heavily reliant on a kind of tree that only grows in the Amazon, like probably not really going to crack it in the city very well. There's many, many more. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a second. As soon as I can get this slide to flip. There we go. So again, what adaptations are allowing them to hack urban areas? So I broke this into kind of two categories. It's a little more complex than that, but this will do for now. The first category being things that are immediately helpful. So things like behavioral changes, phenotypic plasticity, which is when a single genotype can have multiple phenotypic expressions depending on the environment in which the animal or plant or whatever comes up. Individual choices based on experience. So if you're a fish and you bite into a fish hook one time and you have any kind of cognition, you may be able to recognize next time you see one of them. Basically things like that. Fish example is not a great one, but I think you guys get what I mean. And if you don't, please email me. And camouflage or cryptic appearances is a great one. We've got this picture of this moth right here, very, very well camouflaged. And then there's another category, which is adaptations that are more helpful over time. So every time that I feel like someone in the eval department says over time, we're always basically just talking about evolution. So that's just any heritable genetic-based trait or character changes. So that can affect behavior, it can affect appearance, it can affect many things, but it's basically just evolution on some kind of scale. Another thing that can be helpful over time is actually human interference when it's in a positive manner. So here you have a picture of, my mouse is on it now, one of these corridors that have been built in some spaces to allow animals to kind of cross over the highway in a more safe way, speaking of vehicle strikes from earlier. It's not technically an adaptation reconciliation ecology, but it's worth noting because it's really important. All right. So here's a good example of something that might be immediately helpful in terms of adaptation to city life. Sorry, I keep moving myself around. I don't want to block any pictures or anything. A great example of this is actually the alligators in City Park in New Orleans. So alligators will move in from their natural habitats, which are very nearby. City Park is near the lake, it's near the bayou, it's kind of just in a less populous area than, say, downtown. So it's a great place for more wild animals to be existing. It's also a huge green space with lots of water and possibly lots of food opportunities. So actually, we are asked to report large alligators to city park officials so that they can be moved because the city has become extremely aware of alligator attacks that have happened in other places like Orlando, per se. I'm sure we all remember that child tragically being attacked by an alligator, especially after that. City officials got very nervous about the alligators in City Park, but the presence of alligators in City Park has actually been more problematic for the alligators than for the residents so far. So we'll see if that continues. They're basically able to use the park because they're really well camouflaged and because they can eat a wide variety of food. So this is kind of a double whammy. Alligators are pretty generalist in terms of what they can eat. They're obviously very carnivorous, but essentially will eat just about anything that they can catch in the water, anything that is dropped into the water. But their camouflage is the thing that I'm talking about right now. So as you guys can see, these were actual pictures that were all taken in City Park, not by me, but by other residents or tourists. This one at the top is actually a 6-foot alligator that was found near Scout Island and was subsequently removed by city park officials. This is just a teeny tiny little one. He's cute. And then another little one right in front of the Esplanade, which is right across the street from City Park using the same waterways. So, yeah, they're able to eat a wide variety of food, able to be really incredibly well camouflaged. Alligators are probably some of the classic examples of camouflage. They always come to mind for me as soon as I think of camouflage. So alligators existing in the city isn't something that you'll find in a lot of places, but New Orleans, Orlando, Jacksonville, those are all great examples of these kind of like weird movement towards more animals moving into our cities, and how do we react with that and how do we interact with that, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit more in some further lectures. And alligators are typically so well camouflaged that it's really not unusual for them to grow to adult sizes. Like I said, there's a 6-foot gator right at the top in the park before being spotted and subsequently moved by city park officials. So it's pretty interesting how well they're able to camouflage and how well they're able to survive in the park, despite that there's not huge fish populations, although there obviously are some, since some of these are natural waterways. And there's a lot of human interaction in the park, obviously almost 24 hours a day sometimes. So it's an interesting one. Now let's talk about helpful evolution over time. So yeah, I'm sure we all know the expression, like a moth to a flame. But in this case, not really anymore. A study conducted in Switzerland actually found that moths in urban areas are evolving to avoid sources of light because sources of light often prove fatal for them. So, you know, flying into a bug zapper. I know we talked about that a little bit in the beginning, where light is often a cause of fatality for insects. So it's kind of it's a paradox trying to navigate, like, okay, I have this like natural attraction or affinity to this light, and okay, but this light doesn't mean the same thing that it did generations ago. Like this light is basically going to electrocute me. So having to kind of navigate that, I'm sure, has been evolutionary very complex. And the evolutionary consequences of this are still up for debate, but researchers actually imagine that it's going to be negative. Despite decreased flight to light deaths, these populations of moths won't be able to properly colonize as a result of decreased mobility because of the ever-present presence of light. It's everywhere. So if moths are beginning to avoid light, that can cause huge problems for them in terms of being able to find food, being able to find a mate, being able to find a place to exist just in general. So like I said, this study was done in Switzerland. I've got the citation down below if you're interested in reading it. It's an excellent read. I read it last year in animal behavior, or actually last semester in animal behavior. So yeah, that's a good one too. And this is a behavioral change that resulted from natural selection. So kind of tying that back into what we talked about in terms of helpful over the long haul. Natural selection is often, or pretty much always, a factor in there. But this is an example of a behavioral change that resulted from this natural selection, as opposed to appearance-based ones. As far as I read in the study, these moths have not changed their appearance in any way. All right, so now we know what makes an animal more likely to survive in the city, but what attracts them there in the first place? Click on part 2 to find out from Jessie. Thanks, everyone.